I was thinking last Sunday night, watching part of the Grammys, that I suppose 90% of all of the songs that have ever been written have been about love in one way or the other, don't you think? So I thought it might be interesting for a few minutes just to get us started to ask you to think of all the songs that you can think of with love either in the title or the first line. We're going to go on the honor system. Why don't you can either do this alone. I did it at breakfast this morning, had to use all my fingers. And, or you can do it with whoever you came with, your family or your friends next to you. Take a minute and turn it around to somebody and somebody count. See how many you can think of. Songs that have love, the word love in the title or the first line. Go. Time is up. You could keep going, couldn't you? How many thought of at least 5? 7? 10? Anybody have 10? 9? 8? Okay, there's the winners back in the back. You have a special prize this morning. I brought my dog, and after the service, she's going to give you a great big lick. I know you'll like that. Well, there's a lot said about love, and most of those songs about love have a little truth in them and a little garbage, right? So there's a lot that we think about love popularly that's not quite the way it is in real life. I mean, love in real life is sometimes pretty hard to do because life can be hard and difficult. You're put into difficult situations. It stretches you. People stretch you. People fail you. People disappoint. And yet, what God says is, I want you to love them. I want you to choose to love them. It's a choice. It's an act of your will. You don't love others just because they did something good for you or for what you can get from them. But love is a giving thing. It's a selfless thing. And here we are in 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to wrap up the section on love today, and then we're going to move to chapter 16 and see some really interesting things starting next week in chapter 16. But here in chapter 13, the love chapter, we're looking today at verses 5 through 7. Let me read it once in the New American Standard Version, but in your notes today, I used the New International Version because I thought it was just simpler and easier and more clear. So I'll read you the hard one first. Love does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. It is not provoked. It does not take into account a wrong suffered. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. We'll stop there. So let's start in verse 5. We're going to look at these things individually and talk about some of them a little more than others. But it starts with, I think it's the New International says, love is not rude. Love is not rude. Love does not act unbecomingly. That means love does not act in an improper way. It doesn't get out of line. It doesn't go out of bounds. Love is careful about how it treats other people. That's a good thing, isn't it? You know, if you think of this in the most basic way, it includes basic social skills. Things like, please, thank you, I'm sorry, can I help you? It involves taking your turn, listening, some basic social skills. I was reading an article that was kind of a governmental article, and it was about finding jobs for people who had been out of work, and particularly people who didn't have a strong educational background, and so they were finding them jobs and helping them get into the workplace, but discovered that a pretty high percentage of them, after 6 to 9 months, were no longer in that job. And as they looked into it to discover the reasons why, they decided a lot of it was that they just didn't have basic social skills to exist in an environment where they're working closely with other people. This is something that I think parents have to teach children. You know, you teach your children what it's like when you meet someone. You look them in the eye. In our country, we offer a hand, shake hands. You grip a little bit instead of that. There are social skills that we teach. We teach our children how to sit at a table, what fork to, how to eat, and how to talk to other people, how to meet other people, things like that. And it carries through. And a lot of people think that's not really very important when you become an adult. I hear people say, well, I'm just me. They just have to take me the way I am. Well, the thing is, people will take you the way you are and just leave you. It's not fun to be around rude people very much. And so this is a basic thing here. Love is not rude, and I think it is one of those life skills that begins with just learning basic social skills. But if you take that beyond the basic, it also is crucial right within your friendships, your family, your marriage, between parents and children. It's learning to treat each other appropriately, kindly. It's learning to say the appropriate things, learning to express appreciation, learning to take your turn. A lot of these things about love make me think of the everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten, because these are basic truths that teach us how to live, and in every case, it's how to live a successful life in the things that really matter, relationships and other things. So here, God is saying, how are you doing and how you treat others? The question would be for us, how are my manners? How are my manners? I think I said last week, but I just reinforce it, repeat it today. I've so often thought that when I've talked with people that were having marriage conflict, that if they treated each other as nicely as they treat me, it would go a long ways. And I think sometimes just good manners, acting properly towards your spouse or towards your children or your parents, goes a long ways. You remember the proverb, it's one of my favorites, that says, a soft answer turns away wrath, a gentle answer keeps somebody from arguing back, fighting back. It stops the conflict. Well, that's part of what you have here. You treat somebody with love, with respect, with appreciation. How are my manners? That verse goes on to say, love does not seek its own, or simply put, love is not selfish. Love is not selfish. I heard a story about a woman who one Saturday afternoon, she got a knock at her door, and she went to the door, and there was a man there that she didn't know, and he said, ma'am, excuse me, but I'm taking up a collection today for one of your neighbors. The family has been going through a lot of difficulties. The husband has lost his job. The children have been sick. The utilities are about to be shut off. And worst of all, if they don't pay their rent by the end of today, they're going to be evicted. And the woman felt compassion for these neighbors that she didn't know. And she said, well, sure, I'd be glad to help, but who are you? He said, well, I'm the landlord. Sometimes we do right things for sort of selfish motives, and that can be a problem. We seem to be doing the right stuff, but it's still all about us. But a genuine love isn't so concerned about me as you. It's outward other-centered. It's concern for the needs of others. Love is not selfish. It doesn't put me at the center of my little world. Love puts others first. It is concern for the needs of others. You remember back in chapter 8, we looked at that whole part about not making your brother stumble, about giving up things that might cause someone else to stumble. If it would cause my brother to stumble, the Apostle Paul said, then I won't eat meat that was served to idols, because they might think that that is an evil thing. I'll give up my right. And that is an example of the kind of love that's being spoken of here, a selfless love that sees other people's needs and issues and problems and is willing to give up a little of your own for their benefit. It's not selfish. And that happens a lot in life when you get, especially as you get close to people. You compromise a little, you're willing to go the extra mile to do a little bit more in order to meet the needs of the person that you're living with or married to, involved with, I should say. I want to apply this to another area that we don't talk about that much in church, but the whole area of the sexual relationship. I think that in general, most of what we pick up culturally about sex doesn't have much to do with love. But what God has designed is that sex is in the love relationship. It's a part of the love relationship, right? It's why he says sex should be for marriage. It's for two people who have committed to each other forever, and they have this special relationship that they share. But when you put sex within the context of love, it reminds you that sex is about not taking, but giving. There's a mutual thing that is shared there between the two. There's certainly some receiving involved in sexual relationship, but if you stop and think, if you're putting your partner first and wanting to meet their needs, to please them instead of just pleasing yourself, it becomes something much more and something much better, something that lasts much longer. Somebody said, love can wait to give, but lust can't wait to take. If your sexual desires are within the boundaries of love, you can wait as long as you need to wait. And for some, that means waiting until they get married. But lust can't wait to take. Lust is all about my needs, getting me satisfied right now, because it's that burning desire. It's within all of us, and yet it should have the boundaries of being within love. When sex is within the confines of love, there are no 50 shades of twisted perversion. And there you see this total misunderstanding, I think, of what God intended the sexual relationship to be, the cement between two people who are committed to each other forever, where the whole idea is to give, to bless, to bring delight, to bring satisfaction. Because when you give that to one, you receive it back yourself. So the question here might be, who am I trying to please? If love is not selfish, I have to ask myself the question, well, who am I trying to please? Because if it's all about trying to please me, I don't have it. I don't understand it yet. But growing into real mature love is when you start thinking more of how can I please others. And some of you are blessed to be living with people like that. You've had parents that blessed you because they cared about you and cared for your needs. You may have had a spouse, friends. To have a friend like this is an incredible blessing. It ought to remind us this is what we want to be. It's what God says we should be. Love is not selfish. And then you come to the next one, which I think is kind of a fun and funny one. It is in verse 5 here, love is not provoked or easily provoked. And I like that love is not touchy. She's looking at me, quit it, your children. We were at a restaurant and this family came in and they had 4 little boys who, the youngest one was, we guessed, probably 9 months. But the oldest one didn't look like he could be more than 5 or 6. So they had a handful there. So I was kind of curious what they would order in the restaurant. And when they brought out the food, they had, of course, the grilled cheese sandwich for the kids. But it was one of those restaurants that does their own chips. And so there's like this huge mound of chips on the plate. And I looked over and was watching just as one of the little boys was saying to his little brother, "Those are my chips." And I thought, there's a little of that in all of us, right? That's mine. And that kind of touchy. There were enough chips there to feed an army. They could have all eaten, I think. But sometimes we're a little touchy and a little selfish and a little all about me, and we want to guard what we've got and not necessarily share. But love isn't touchy. That means it's not easily provoked. It's not easily angered. Love is not irritable. Some people, it's like they're just prickly. You get close and you're going to get pricked because they're touchy. You just kind of want to stay back a little bit and not get that close. But that's not love. That's not a loving life. If you see in yourself that you've got this short fuse, that you're prickly, that you're touchy, that you're irritated with people pretty easily, something's off there. Something's wrong. It's time to stop and take a look. And it happens to all of us, I think. It can happen to all of us. In Philippians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul is writing to these people that he loved in this church. He knew them very well. It was probably one of the churches he was closest to. And he says in chapter 4, verse 2, I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche, these are two women's names, to live in harmony in the Lord. Here you have 2 women who helped build that church, who are right at the heart of the church, very involved in ministry, apparently loved the Lord, but they can't get along with each other. She says, I urge you to live in harmony, get along. I heard one preacher who called their names Odious and Soon-Touchy. And of course, Odious and Soon-Touchy aren't going to get along very well. If you're touchy, you're not loving. Real love is not touchy. It's not easily provoked. It's got a slow fuse. And again, a lot of people will say, well, it's just the way I am. I've got a short fuse. Like that's an excuse for blowing up and going off on people. It's not an excuse. It's something to work on. We all are born with certain weak areas in our lives, but the idea is not to leave them there, but to grow through them, grow above them, beyond them. So what do? Well, sometimes you got to take a breath. Step out of the room for a minute. Think before you respond. It does matter. And then he says, he being, it's the Apostle Paul writing, but it's the Spirit of God giving us God's word through him. Love is not easily provoked. Love does not take into account a wrong suffered. Doesn't take into, or I like this, love does not keep a record of wrongs. Love doesn't have a secret little journal or notebook where every time your spouse or your parent or someone fails you, your boss, your coworker, you're keeping a list of all of their failures every time that they have annoyed you, every time they have offended you or hurt you. You have this little list, and somehow every time you get in a new discussion, all the stuff from 10 years past is all dredged up again. And it's, your discussion or argument is not just about today's issue, but it's about all of these things that we've been going through in our relationship for years. And you got one side, one spouse who's thinking, oh, come on, not that again. Can't we ever just settle this? I've said I'm sorry. I've asked your forgiveness so many times. Can't you let it go? And some people just have so much trouble letting it go. Love doesn't keep that list. It was a hard thing to do. I think forgiveness may be one of the very hardest things we're called to do. But here I think he's saying this is what love is. It's what love does. It doesn't keep a list of wrongs. So can I just go out on a limb here and tell you, I generally look up the passage in the Greek, if it's New Testament, and look and see what the original words were. And here I discovered that there's an interesting word for this wrong, for having been wronged or a wrong suffered. It's the idea of a wrong that is done to you, of something that is an injustice or an offense. The Greek word is kakos. So I don't know that the Greek adds too much more to that, but being the shrewd linguist that I am, and having just spent a week with our grandson changing diapers, I thought, well, gee, maybe that's where we get the English word caca. Because that's pretty much the idea. You don't keep a list of that people toss your way. You don't dwell on it. You don't meditate on it. You don't keep going back through that in your mind because it is ugly. It is smelly. It'll stink up your life. It'll stink up your love. It'll ruin your relationships. You keep a list of everything that's been done against you. Every time you've been a little hurt or offended, you'll never get through it. Somehow you got to take that list and give it over to God. I think sometimes you got to pray, God, help me just to forget this. Help me to leave it behind. Help me not to keep bringing this hurt back to mind and thinking about it and dwelling in it. Help me to get rid of that list. Help me to forgive. Forgiving means you decide, I'm not going to try to get vengeance. I'm not going to do payback. I'm not going to hold this against the person any longer. It may be hard to forget, but forgiving is when you no longer hold it against the person. And that's an act of your will that says, I'm not going to bring this up again the next time we have another conflict. I'm not going to bring up the last 20 that I've got on my list. You settle it once, and then you may have to work on it yourself. And I realize this can get complicated, particularly if you feel like the person is not honest with you, that they're not trying, that you can't trust them, that you're not sure if they're going to keep doing the same thing. It can get complicated, I get that. But in general, this says love doesn't keep that list. It lets it go. It starts new. Doesn't keep a record of wrongs. There's that kind of famous verse in 1 Peter 4:8. Let me turn there real quick. Peter writes, above all, you hear it? Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another. It's the most important thing. It's the same thing it says in 1 Corinthians 13. The greatest of these is love. Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. It's why we have that expression, only a mother could love a boy like that. Well, it's because love covers a multitude of sins. Real love can see hope, can see the best, not just the worst. It doesn't freeze a person in the worst moment of their life. What a horrible, horrible thing when we do something so stupid, so bad, we regret it. We look back and think, why did I ever do that? And someone close to us has frozen us in that moment, and they can't let us go. They can't see us beyond that. They can't see that we want out of that we want to move on. But love lets you out of your worst. It sees you at your best. It doesn't keep a list of wrongs. Maybe it keeps a record of the good things that others have done for you. That would be better, wouldn't it? So the question here that we should ask ourselves, I think, is, do I forgive and move on? Or do I keep going over the list and stay back in the land of misery? And then we come to verse 6, which really has a pair that go together. Love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. NIV says, love does not delight in evil. Does not delight in evil. Phillips, who did kind of a paraphrase, said, love does not gloat over the wickedness of others. Does not gloat over the wickedness of others. Does not rejoice in others. I think you can take it in two ways. It doesn't rejoice in the bad things that other people do, and I think often we glorify the bad boys, the scoundrels. A lot of our, especially movies and stories and books and things like that, in some ways celebrate unrighteousness. But it can also mean, I think, love does not rejoice in, if it's unrighteousness, it doesn't rejoice in the failures of others, in the falling, the sin of others. It doesn't enjoy that. There's no sense of, well, she finally got what she deserved. There's none of that in love. It doesn't delight in evil. And it seems to me that maybe the most significant area that this may happen in is the area of gossip, of talking about others, of sharing others' failures, of telling others problems. And we probably wouldn't admit it, but sometimes there's this secret delight in sharing others' failures with other people. And occasionally it's masked in, you should pray for so-and-so because guess what she did? That makes it even worse, doesn't it? Love covers a multitude of sins. It doesn't expose them. This says, don't expose others' sin. Don't enjoy it. Don't lift it up. Cover it. Protect people. Now, I know sometimes we have to have tough love, and people have to be confronted, and you have to do something, but this is all about this inner hearts thing. We ought to grieve over other people's problems and sin and failure, not enjoy it and pass it on to others. You know, when you pass on other people's problems, one of the things that happens is that, you know, let's say you start talking about a couple that's got marriage issues or something like that, and the word sort of begins to get around. It makes it harder to reconcile and to come back and when the marriage grows back together for the people to have a normal life, because they're thinking, who all knows? What do they know? What are they saying? Love keeps it quiet. It doesn't talk unless there's a reason for it to the people that need to hear something. Love doesn't delight in evil. The question would be, do I celebrate failure and sin? Because if you celebrate other people's failure and other people's sin, that's not love. Love delights in the truth. Love delights when truth is victorious. Love is cheering. Love is happy to see when truth wins out, when goodness wins out, when right wins out. Do I focus on truth or on gunk? And the last verse, verse 7, really we ought to spend a whole week on it, but instead I'm going to just see it as it really is. It's kind of the summary here. It says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. No wonder love is the greatest of all, as it says at the end of the chapter. So I was thinking, what does this really mean, though, that love bears all things? Love bears all things. I think you could look at this in a number of different ways, but let's look at it like this today. This verse 7 tells us the power of love, how powerful love really is, because love is greater than selfishness. It's more than selfishness. It bears all things. See, if I'm selfish, I'm not going to bear your burden. I'm not going to bear your problems. In fact, if you got a problem, I'm going to move away, because why should I have to deal with that? I got my own happiness to think about. But love bears all things. It is unselfish. It puts aside personal needs and considers the needs of others as important as my own. Love is more powerful than selfishness. Love believes all things. And I think here, to me, it's saying that love is more powerful than failure. It's more powerful than the failure of those around me. It believes all things. You see your children that aren't where you want them to be, and there's some kind of a stumble, but love believes all things. It can see ahead. It can picture for them a better future, a greater future. It believes in them. When your spouse or your friend or even someone you work with stumbles and does something dumb and they're not there yet, but love sees beyond that. It believes all things. It overcomes failure. It's bigger than failure. It's able to see something else. Love hopes all things. It hopes all things. And I think here you have love is, what would you say? Love is more powerful than despair? Yes. I put disappointment. Despair is even stronger. Disappointment, I think, has more to do with my attitude toward others, with how they've affected me. I'm disappointed because someone has somehow failed me or disappointed me, but love hopes all things. It keeps hoping. It keeps expecting. It keeps cheering. Isn't love a great cheerleader? I mean, we had a lot of problems in my family growing up, but my mother was the greatest cheerleader, and I grew up feeling loved because she constantly expressed it and kept telling me how wonderful I was, and I sort of believed it. Which is the way it's supposed to be, isn't it? Love believes, it hopes all things, believes all things, hopes all things. Sometimes you got to set people straight. That's part of love, but love is a cheerleader. And then endures all things. Love endures all things. What would you say that means? I thought of it as love makes it through the trials of life. Love makes it through the hard times. You know what? the statistics of families that have lost a child, that often the marriage then goes because it's so hard, and I can understand that. But the beautiful thing is where you can go through real trials and difficulties in your life, but love endures. It pulls together, it lifts up and strengthens. It reaches down and picks up the broken one and raises them up and helps them to make it on. Love endures the trials of life. It's hard to love real people because people are messy. It's hard to love in the real world because the world's full of problems and difficulties and trials. But God says, this is the greatest thing. Above all, love one another. The greatest of these is love. This is the way that people will know you're my disciples, is by your love for one another. In so many ways, God tells us over and over, love one another, love one another, love one another. Choose to love. As an act of your will, say, I will love. Don't stop. Don't give up. Love. Let's have a word of prayer. Oh, Father, thank you for loving us and for showing us what love is when you sent your Son and he gave himself up for us. Help us to love others around us. It's hard to empty ourselves, to be selfless, to consider others more important than ourselves, but help us to see people and understand them, to see their needs, to cheer for them, to encourage them, to love them. And as we do it, may you be honored and glorified and pleased. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. So we mentioned the heart. And in your bulletin, you had a little heart. And what I'd like for you to do is take just a minute here. We're going to listen to a song while we do this. And I'd like for you to write a note on the heart of, it could be appreciation for someone, thankful for someone, some little note of encouragement or support. I'd like you to do it, somebody in the church, if possible. And let's not send them all to the same person, but maybe there's someone that meets you at the door on Sunday mornings or that sits on your row and encourages you, someone that has shown you love, somebody that you want to show a little appreciation back to. Write them a note. After we do this, you can either put them in their mail files or you can take it and hand it to them personally. And you'll probably think of more than one person that you would like to write a note like this to. And so I only gave you one heart, but you can certainly write more notes or just stop and say it, right? Just say it. We need to express it more, love for one another. So I'll let you write. Do any of you need a heart? That was good. Bob's got some hearts here.
All the room was hushed and still. And when the bowl was filled, he stooped to wash their feet. And when it was complete, he said, "This is what I'm asking you to do. This is why I'm kneeling here beside you. This is what I want my church to be. This is what I want the world to see. Who it is you follow. Love each other, one another. Love each other in the way that I have loved you. Walk together and be hushed and still. Let us go to where he kneels and join him as he serves and learn his ways of love. 'Cause he said, this is what I'm asking you to do. This is why I'm kneeling here beside you. This is what I want my church to be. This is what I want the world to see. Who it is you follow. Love each other, one another. Love each other in the way that I have loved you. Walk together, and whatever comes, love each other in the way that I have loved you. Love each other, one another. Love each other in the way that I have loved you. Walk together, and whatever comes, love each other in the way that I have loved you.
Would you stand, please? John wrote in 1 John 4, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God." So may God bless you, and may you bless others.